The sound of a body hitting the floor echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Sarah, pale and trembling, had finally collapsed under the weight of the lies destroying her life. In the opposing stands, Jessica, the woman who had stolen her husband, her home, and her dignity, didn't gasp. She didn't look concerned. She just smirked, checking her manicured nails, confident that her victory was sealed. But that smile was premature, because lying on the judge's bench was a small, overlooked USB drive that Sarah's lawyer had just submitted into evidence. Judge Miller picked it up, his face hardening. What was on that recording wouldn't just wake Sarah up, it would send 2 people to prison. Stay tuned, because you won't believe what they were saying when they thought no one was listening. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when Sarah Jenkins realized her life was a lie. The house in the upscale neighborhood of Silver Lake, Seattle, was quiet. It was the kind of house that appeared in architectural magazines, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble floors, and an overarching silence that used to feel peaceful but now felt oppressive. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at a receipt she had found in the pocket of her husband's blazer. It wasn't a receipt for a hotel room or jewelry. It was a receipt for a consultation with a divorce attorney specializing in aggressive asset protection. The date was from 3 months ago. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She and Mark had been married for 10 years. She had been there when Mark was just a junior developer with a mountain of student debt and a dream of building a logistics software company. She had worked 2 jobs as a paralegal to pay their rent so he could code in the garage. When Logitech finally went public, they became millionaires overnight. But Sarah hadn't changed. She still shopped at the local market, still volunteered at the animal shelter, and still loved Mark with the same intensity she had when they were poor. She heard the front door click open. "Sarah, I'm home," Mark's voice boomed from the hallway. He sounded cheerful, the tone of a man who had nothing to hide. Sarah folded the receipt and shoved it into her apron pocket. She needed to be smart. If Mark had been planning this for months, he was already 10 steps ahead of her. Mark walked into the kitchen, loosening his silk tie. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way. Dark hair, jawline carved from granite, and eyes that used to look at her with warmth, but had recently turned glassy and distant. "Hey," he said, pecking her on the cheek. "Dinner ready?" "Just finishing up," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mark, we need to talk." Mark paused, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "Can it wait? I've had a brutal day. The board is breathing down my neck about the merger." "It's about us," Sarah said, turning to face him. Mark sighed, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. He leaned against the marble island. "Sarah, if this is about me missing your sister's birthday, I already apologized. I'm building an empire here. Sacrifices have to be made." "I found the receipt, Mark," she whispered. The room went dead silent. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to roar. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. Instead, his expression shifted into something cold and unrecognizable. He took a slow sip of his drink. "Well," Mark said, his voice devoid of emotion, "that saves me the trouble of breaking it to you tonight." "Breaking what to me?" Sarah asked, tears pricking her eyes. "That you're leaving me?" "That you are leaving me," Mark corrected calmly. "See, Sarah, I've outgrown this. I've outgrown you. You're a lovely woman, but you're simple. You don't fit the image of a CEO's wife anymore. I need someone with edge, someone with ambition." "I worked double shifts for 4 years to fund your company," Sarah screamed, the betrayal cutting deep. "And you were compensated," Mark shot back. "You live in a $5 million house. You drive a Porsche. We're even." We're married, Mark. It's not a transaction. Mark set his glass down. Everything is a transaction, Sarah, and our contract has expired. My lawyers have already drawn up the papers. Since we didn't sign a prenup, I anticipated you'd try to take half. That's why I've been protecting my assets. You'll get the guest cottage in Oregon and a small stipend. If you fight me, I'll ruin you. I have the best lawyers in the state. I won't sign anything, Sarah said, shaking. You will, a new voice said from the hallway. Sarah spun around. Standing in the entryway of the kitchen was a woman. She was tall, stunningly beautiful, with raven black hair and a red dress that cost more than Sarah's first car. It was Jessica Vane, Mark's new chief financial officer. Sarah looked between them. The realization hit her like a physical blow. You brought her here, into our home? Jessica walked in, the click of her heels sharp against the floor. She didn't look at Sarah with sympathy. She looked at her like one looks at a stain on a rug. It's Mark's home, sweetie, and soon it'll be mine. Get out, Sarah hissed. Mark, Jessica said, pouting slightly. She's being hysterical. I told you she wouldn't handle this with dignity. Pack a bag, Sarah, Mark said, checking his watch. Jessica is moving in tonight. You can stay at a hotel until the lawyers sort out the separation. You can't kick me out of my own house? Mark laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Actually, I can. The house is owned by a shell corporation under the company's name. Technically, you're just a tenant, and your lease is up. Sarah felt the room spin. They had planned this. Every detail. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was calculated to break her spirit so she would sign whatever they put in front of her. I'm not leaving, Sarah said, grabbing the counter for support. Mark stepped closer, his face inches from hers. Then I'll have security escort you out. Don't make a scene, Sarah. It's pathetic. Sarah looked into the eyes of the man she had loved for a decade and saw nothing but a monster. She grabbed her purse, her keys, and walked past Jessica, who whispered, Don't worry, I'll take good care of him. Sarah stormed out into the rainy Seattle night, her heart shattered, but a small spark of fury igniting in her chest. They thought she was weak. They thought she was just the simple wife. They were about to find out that Sarah Jenkins was a fighter. But first, she had to survive the night. 2 weeks later, Sarah was living in a motel on the outskirts of the city. Her bank accounts had been frozen. Mark claimed suspicious activity and put a hold on their joint funds. Her credit cards were declined. She had $300 in cash and a beat-up suitcase. She sat on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the court summons she had received that morning. Mark wasn't just divorcing her, he was suing her. He was claiming she had been the one committing infidelity, citing emotional abandonment and attempting to void her rights to any marital assets. It was a complete fabrication, but Mark had the money to manufacture truth. Her phone buzzed. It was Eleanor Rossi, a lawyer Sarah had hired. Eleanor wasn't from a big, fancy firm. She worked out of a small office above a bakery, but she had a reputation for being a pit bull in the courtroom. Sarah, I have bad news. Eleanor's raspy voice came through the speaker. Mark's team filed an emergency motion. They're trying to get a gag order to stop you from talking to the press or the board of directors about the affair. Let them, Sarah said, her voice hoarse from crying. I don't care about the press. I just want what's fair. Elena, he blocked my cards. I can't even buy groceries. We'll file a motion for temporary support, Elena promised. But Sarah, you need to brace yourself. Mark is playing dirty. Jessica Vane isn't just his mistress. She's the one orchestrating the legal strategy. She used to be a corporate litigator before she became his CFO. They are trying to starve you out. I'm not signing, Sarah repeated. Good. Listen, I need you to think. Is there anything you have? Old emails? Texts? Anything that proves the affair started before he filed? Anything that proves he's hiding money? Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back. Mark was careful. He used encrypted apps. He never brought work documents home, or so she thought. Then she remembered something. 6 months ago, Mark had brought home a new smart home. System prototype his company was developing. He had installed voice-activated hubs in every room to test the bugs. He had been obsessed with it for a few weeks, then claimed the project was scrapped and he had disabled them. But Sarah hadn't seen him remove the hub in the library, his home office. It sat on the top shelf, disguised as a vintage speaker. The prototype, Sarah whispered. What? Elena asked. Mark installed a voice-recording smart hub in his home office months ago. He said he turned it off. But Mark is lazy about hardware. If he just unplugged the base station, the internal memory card in the unit might still be there. It records on a loop. Sarah, Elena's voice sharpened. If that device was recording while he and Jessica were plotting this, that's our smoking gun. But you're not in the house. I still have my key, Sarah said. They changed the locks on the front door, I'm sure. But the patio door has a trick lock. You have to jiggle it a specific way. Mark never fixed it because he never goes into the garden. It's risky, Elena warned. If they catch you, they'll charge you with trespassing. It could ruin your credibility. I have nothing left to lose, Sarah said, standing up. I'm going tonight. The rain was torrential, which was a blessing. It masked the sound of Sarah's boots as she crept through the garden she had planted with her own hands. The house loomed above her, dark except for the light in the master bedroom upstairs. She could see shadows moving against the curtains. 2 silhouettes, Mark and Jessica. Sarah felt a wave of nausea, but swallowed it down. She crept to the patio door. She inserted her old key, jiggled the handle upward, and prayed. With a soft click, the bolt slid back. She was in. The house smelled like Jessica now, an overpowering scent of expensive, heavy perfume that masked the smell of the lavender candles Sarah used to burn. Sarah moved like a ghost, stepping on the rugs to avoid the squeaky floorboards. She reached the library. It was pitch black. She didn't dare turn on a light. Using the flashlight on her phone, she scanned the shelves. There it was, the sleek black cylinder on the top shelf. Sarah dragged a chair over and climbed up. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost knocked it over. She pried the back panel open. Please be there. Please. Her fingers brushed against a tiny micro SD card slot. It was occupied. She pulled the card out and shoved it into her bra. Suddenly, the library door handle turned. Sarah froze. She was standing on a chair, flashlight in hand. There was nowhere to hide. I heard something down here. Jessica's voice drifted in from the hallway. It's probably the storm, Mark replied, his voice slurred. He sounded drunk. Come back to bed. No, Mark, I want to check. You know your crazy ex-wife is desperate. The door opened. Sarah clicked off her flashlight instantly and ducked down behind the heavy oak desk. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The overhead light flickered on. Jessica walked into the room. She was wearing one of Mark's shirts. Sarah bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. Jessica walked to the window, looking out at the storm. Then she turned and looked at the shelves. Her eyes narrowed. "Mark!" Jessica called out. "What?" Mark yelled from the stairs. "Did you move the chair?" Sarah's eyes widened. She had left the chair in front of the bookshelf. Mark appeared in the doorway, holding a tumbler of whiskey. "What chair?" "The library chair. It's in the middle of the room." Mark shrugged. "The cleaners probably moved it. Who cares? Come on, Jess. I'm celebrating. My lawyer says Sarah will run out of money by Friday. She'll be begging to sign the settlement. Jessica smiled, a cruel, predatory curl of her lips. God, I can't wait until she's gone for good. She's such a bore. Once the divorce is final, we can finally transfer the offshore funds back to the main account without her signatures. Sarah, huddled behind the desk, felt a jolt of electricity. Offshore funds. Shh, Mark laughed. Don't say that out loud, even in my own house. Paranoid, Jessica teased. She walked over to the desk. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. Jessica was inches away. If she walked around the desk, it was over. Let's go, Jessica said, turning off the light. I'm cold. They left. Sarah waited 10 full minutes in the dark, shivering, clutching the SD card against her chest. When she finally slipped back out into the rain, she didn't just have evidence of an affair. She had a feeling she had something much, much worse. But the stress of the night had taken a toll. As Sarah ran to her car parked 2 blocks away, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over in the rain. She ignored it, started the engine, and drove away. She didn't know it yet, but her body was breaking down. The fight was just beginning, and she was already running on empty. Sarah didn't sleep that night. The adrenaline coursing through her veins felt like battery acid. She sat in her rusted sedan outside Elena Rossi's office, waiting for the sun to rise. The pain in her chest had dulled to a persistent, heavy ache, like a stone sitting on her heart. But she attributed it to the stress. She couldn't afford to be sick. Not now. At 7 a.m. sharp, Elena arrived, juggling a coffee and a briefcase. When she saw Sarah's pale, ghost-like face in the parking lot, she almost dropped her keys. Sarah, good Lord, you look terrible, Elena said, unlocking the door. Get inside. Did you get it? Sarah placed the tiny micro SD card on Eleanor's desk. It looked so insignificant, a piece of plastic the size of a fingernail. Yet it held the potential to destroy an empire. Mark said they planned to transfer offshore funds, Sarah rasped, her voice barely a whisper. And Jessica. She talked about waiting for me to be gone. Eleanor's eyes widened. She immediately locked the office door and pulled the blinds. She inserted the card into an adapter and plugged it into her secure laptop. Okay, this holds weeks of audio. We need to find the relevant timestamps. You said last night, around 11 p.m. They spent the next 4 hours scrubbing through audio files. Most of it was mundane silence, the hum of the air conditioner, or Mark taking business calls where he sounded like the arrogant CEO everyone knew. But then they found a file dated 2 weeks prior. Elena clicked play. Mark's voice. The valuation is coming in too high, Jessica. If the company is worth $200 million, Sarah gets half of the shares. I can't have her on the board. Jessica's voice. I told you, Mark. We tank the Q3 earnings. We hide the intellectual property for the new logistics algorithm under the shell company in the Caymans. We release the bad report, the stock drops. You divorce her when the assets look low. Then, once she's out, we discover the new tech and the stock skyrockets again. Elena paused the recording. She looked at Sarah, her mouth agape. That's fraud. That's massive federal securities fraud. They aren't just hiding money from you. They're defrauding their shareholders. Keep listening, Sarah said, staring at the spinning waveform on the screen. Elena clicked play again. Mark. She's going to fight it. She's stubborn. Jessica. Stop worrying. If she doesn't sign the settlement by the court date, we go to Plan B. I have a contact at the precinct. We plant a few ounces of cocaine in her car. An anonymous tip, a traffic stop, and suddenly the grieving wife is a drug addict. The judge will grant you full custody of the assets, and she'll be lucky to stay out of jail." The room went silent. Sarah felt the blood rush from her head. They weren't just trying to rob her. They were willing to send her to prison to protect their money. Jessica Vane wasn't just a mistress. She was a sociopath. "Oh my God," Elena whispered. "They are going to frame you." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Do we go to the police?" Elena sat back, her mind racing. "If we go to the police now, Mark's high-priced lawyers will claim the recording is doctored or obtained illegally. Washington is a two-party consent state for audio recording. Technically, this evidence is inadmissible in a normal context, because Mark didn't know he was being recorded." "So it's useless," Sarah cried, panic rising in her throat. "No," Elena said, a dangerous glint appearing in her eyes. "There's a loophole. The crime-fraud exception. Attorney-client privilege and privacy laws go out the window if the communication is used to further a crime. Plus, since this was recorded on a device he installed in the marital home, we can argue there was no expectation of privacy from you, the co-owner of the house." Elena stood up and began pacing. "But we can't just hand it over. We need to trap them. We need them to lie under oath. If Mark denies hiding assets on the stand, and then we play this tape, it's perjury. It's game over. Judge Miller is a hard-liner. He hates liars more than anything." "Judge Miller?" Sarah asked. "Yes. He's the presiding judge for your case. He's old school. Tough. If he catches Mark lying, he won't just rule in your favor. He'll refer the case to the district attorney." Elena leaned over the desk, grabbing Sarah's hands. "Sarah, this is a high-wire act. We have to go to court. You have to endure their lies. You have to let them tear you apart on the stand so they feel safe enough to lie. Can you do that? Can you hold it together?" Sarah thought of Jessica standing in her kitchen, looking at her like she was trash. She thought of Mark, the man she washed clothes for, the man she believed in, planning to plant drugs in her car. The pain in her chest flared again, sharper this time, radiating down her left arm. She flinched. "Sarah," Elena asked, concerned. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah lied, taking a shallow breath. "I'm just angry. I can do it. I want to see their faces when they lose." "Okay," Elena said. "Go back to the motel. Stay inside. Don't drive your car. Take Ubers. I don't want them planting anything before the trial. We see them in court in 3 days." As Sarah left the office, she popped 2 aspirin, praying her heart would just hold out long enough for justice to be served. The day of the trial, the sky over Seattle was a bruised purple, heavy with rain. The King County Superior Court was a massive, imposing building of gray stone, designed to make anyone entering feel small. Sarah arrived in a taxi. She wore a simple navy suit, one of the few nice things she had managed to take with her. She looked frail. She had lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks. Her skin was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. As she walked up the courthouse steps, a black SUV pulled up. The press was already there. Mark was a minor local celebrity due to the tech company's success. Cameras flashed as the back door opened. Mark stepped out, looking like $1 million in a bespoke Italian suit. He waved at the reporters, flashing a charming, confident smile. Jessica followed him. She wasn't wearing a lawyer's suit today. She was dressed in a soft, cream-colored dress, playing the role of the supportive partner. She looked radiant, untouched by the chaos she had caused. When Jessica saw Sarah standing by the security checkpoint, she paused. She leaned over and whispered something to Mark. Mark looked at Sarah, his eyes cold and dead, and smirked. It was a look of total dominance. "Enjoy it while you can," Sarah thought, though her knees felt like jelly. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was stifling. The air conditioner was broken, and the room was humid and tense. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge William Miller walked in. He was a man in his 60s, with a face like a road map of hard decisions. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and had a reputation for suffering no fools. He sat down, organized his files, and looked over his spectacles at the two parties. "We are here in the matter of Jenkins vs. Jenkins," Judge Miller said, his voice booming. "I've reviewed the pretrial motions. Mr. Sterling, you represent the respondent, Mark Jenkins." Mark's lawyer, Arthur Sterling, stood up. Sterling was known as the Butcher of Belltown. He was a man who didn't just win cases, he annihilated the opposition. "Yes, Your Honor. We are ready to proceed." "And Ms. Rossi for the petitioner?" "Ready, Your Honor," Elena said calmly. The morning session was a bloodbath. Sterling didn't hold back. He called Mark to the stand first. Mark played the part of the grieving, overworked husband perfectly. "Mr. Jenkins," Sterling asked, pacing in front of the witness box, "why did you file for divorce?" Mark sighed, looking down at his hands. "It was the hardest decision of my life. I love Sarah. But over the last few years, her behavior became erratic. She started spending uncontrollably. She became paranoid. She accused me of affairs with everyone, my secretary, my barista. It became impossible to run my company with the constant domestic chaos." "Did you hide any assets from her?" Sterling asked. "Absolutely not," Mark said, looking directly at the judge with practiced sincerity. "Every penny is accounted for. The company is actually going through a rough patch. If anything, Sarah is trying to take half of a debt." Sarah gripped the edge of her table. Liar. Then it was Jessica's turn to take the stand as a character witness and the CFO. She sat gracefully, crossing her legs. She spoke in a soft, melodic voice. "Mr. Jenkins is a man of integrity," Jessica told the court. "I've watched him try to help Sarah. He's paid for therapy she refused to attend. He's been a saint." "And regarding the company finances?" Sterling asked. "Logitech is struggling," Jessica lied smoothly. "Our assets are tied up in overhead. There is very little liquidity to split in a divorce settlement. Mr. Jenkins is actually offering Mrs. Jenkins more than the company is currently worth out of the kindness of his heart." Elena Rossi declined to cross-examine Jessica yet. She was waiting. Then it was Sarah's turn. Sarah walked to the witness stand. She felt dizzy. The humidity in the room was suffocating. Her heart was beating in a strange, fluttering rhythm. Thump, thump, pause, thump. Arthur Sterling approached her like a wolf cornering a wounded deer. "Mrs. Jenkins," Sterling began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is it true you haven't held a job in 6 years?" "I supported Mark while he built the company," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I worked 2 jobs before that." "Yes or no, Mrs. Jenkins?" "No, I haven't had a formal employer." "So, you've been living off your husband's success. And now that he wants to leave, you're demanding half of a company you didn't build, is that right?" "I did build it. I paid the rent. I bought the servers," Sarah cried out. "Objection," Sterling said boredly. Non-responsive. "Sustained," Judge Miller said. "Answer the question, Mrs. Jenkins." Sterling moved closer. "Mrs. Jenkins, isn't it true that you suffer from severe anxiety, that you take medication for it?" I have anxiety, yes, because of this." "And isn't it true that paranoid delusions are a side effect of your condition? You imagined your husband was cheating. You imagined he was hiding money. Just like you're imagining that you are a victim here." "I am not imagining it," Sarah insisted, sweat beading on her forehead. The room was starting to tilt to the left. "We have bank records, Mrs. Jenkins," Sterling shouted, waving a stack of papers. "They show you withdrawing thousands of dollars in cash. Were you buying drugs? Gambling?" "No," Sarah gasped. "That was for the house, for groceries." "You are an unstable, vindictive woman who is trying to extort a successful man," Sterling roared, slamming his hand on the railing. "Admit it, you just want the money." Mark was watching from the defense table. He wasn't looking down anymore. He was staring right at her, and he was smiling. Beside him, Jessica covered her mouth to hide a grin. Sarah looked at them. The injustice of it hit her like a physical blow. The heat in the room spiked. The edges of her vision began to turn black. Sarah tried to speak, but her tongue felt heavy. "Admit it," Sterling yelled. A sharp, crushing pain exploded in Sarah's chest. It felt like an iron fist clenching her heart. She gasped, her hand flying to her sternum. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Judge Miller asked, his voice sounding far away, like he was underwater. Sarah tried to stand up to defend herself. I have—" She never finished the sentence. Her eyes rolled back. Her knees buckled. To the horror of the entire courtroom, Sarah Jenkins collapsed forward, smashing her head against the wooden railing of the witness box before tumbling to the floor with a sickening thud. "Sarah!" Elena screamed, jumping up. Pandemonium broke out. The bailiff rushed forward. "Call 911!" Judge Miller shouted, standing up and banging his gavel. From the floor, Sarah's vision was fading to grey. She could hear voices, but they were muffled. She saw shoes running toward her, and through the gap in the railing, she saw one last thing before the darkness took her completely. She saw Jessica Vane. She wasn't rushing to help. She wasn't looking away in horror. Jessica was leaning back in her chair, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Mark and gave him a small, satisfied nod. They thought it was over. They thought the stress had finally broken her. Sarah's world went black. The beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing Sarah heard. It was a steady, rhythmic ping, ping, ping that felt deafening in the quiet room. She opened her eyes. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the emergency room stung. She tried to sit up, but a heavy hand gently pushed her back down. "Whoa, easy there, Tiger," a voice said. It was Eleanor. She was sitting in a plastic chair next to the bed, looking more terrified than Sarah had ever seen her. Her mascara was smudged, and she was gripping a paper cup of coffee, so hard it was crumpling. "What happened?" Sarah croaked. Her chest felt bruised, sore to the touch. "You had a cardiac event," a doctor said, stepping into view. He was young, tired-looking, with a clipboard. "Stress-induced cardiomyopathy. Broken heart syndrome, essentially. Your body flooded with so much adrenaline and cortisol that your heart muscle temporarily stunned itself. You're lucky you didn't go into full arrest." Sarah's eyes widened. "The trial is suspended," Elena said softly. Judge Miller cleared the courtroom. Mark and his lawyer are filing a motion to have the case delayed indefinitely due to your medical incompetence. They're saying you're unfit to testify. "No," Sarah whispered, struggling against the sheets. "What time is it?" "It's 1:30 p.m., Elena checked her watch. "The judge is reconvening at 2 p.m. just to set a new date, probably months from now." "Months," Sarah repeated. "If we wait months, they'll move the money. They'll destroy the evidence. They'll win." She sat up, ignoring the doctor's protest. "I have to go back." "Mrs. Jenkins, you absolutely cannot," the doctor said sternly. "You need rest. Your blood pressure is still unstable." "I don't care," Sarah said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Her head swam, the room spinning like a carousel, but she gripped the railing until her knuckles turned white. "If I stay here, I lose everything. My life My dignity. My truth. I would rather die on that courtroom floor than let them walk away thinking they broke me. She looked at Elena. Get my shoes. Elena looked at the doctor, then back at Sarah. She saw the fire in Sarah's eyes, a cold, hard resolve that hadn't been there before. The fear was gone, burned away by the pain. Sign the discharge waiver, Elena told the doctor. She's leaving. 30 minutes later, the courtroom was buzzing with low conversation. Mark and Jessica were sitting at the defense table, looking relaxed. Mark was checking emails on his phone. Jessica was whispering something to Arthur Sterling, suppressing a giggle. They looked like people who had just dodged a bullet. Whatever happens, Mark said loud enough for the stenographer to hear, we just need to make sure Sarah gets the best care facility. Somewhere quiet. Such a tragedy, Jessica agreed, adjusting her diamond earrings. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Miller entered. He looked grim. He sat down and looked at the empty plaintiff's table. For the record, Judge Miller said, due to the medical emergency regarding the plaintiff, this court is inclined to grant a continuance. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Everyone turned. Sarah stood there. She was leaning heavily on Eleanor's arm. Her face was as white as a sheet, making her dark eyes look enormous. She had removed the hospital bracelet, but still had the bandage on her arm from the IV. She looked fragile, yes, but she was standing. The silence in the room was absolute. Mark's jaw literally dropped. Jessica's smile vanished instantly. I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice weak but steady. I am ready to proceed. Mrs. Jenkins, Judge Miller said, looking over his glasses with genuine concern. You just collapsed. You are under no obligation to continue today. I would like to finish this, Your Honor, Sarah said, walking slowly toward her table. Every step was a battle, but she didn't falter. She sat down and looked across the aisle. She locked eyes with Mark. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. For the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Very well, Judge Miller said, impressed. If the plaintiff insists. Ms. Rossi, call your next witness. Elena stood up. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need them anymore. We recall Mark Jenkins to the stand. Mark walked to the witness stand, but his swagger was gone. He adjusted his tie nervously. He knew Sarah shouldn't be here. Her return had thrown him off his game. Elena Rossi approached the stand. She moved like a predator now, circling her prey. Mr. Jenkins, Elena began, her voice deceptively calm. Before the break, you stated that your company, Logi Tech, is struggling financially. Is that correct? Yes, Mark said, clearing his throat. Market volatility. And you stated under oath that you have disclosed all assets to this court. No hidden accounts? No shell companies? I have nothing to hide, Mark said firmly. Everything is in the discovery documents. Elena nodded slowly. She walked back to her table and picked up a file. And what about your relationship with Ms. Vane? You stated it is purely professional? Ms. Vane is a colleague, Mark lied. She has been a pillar of support during this difficult divorce. So there is no romantic entanglement, no conspiracy to disadvantage your wife? That is absurd, Mark scoffed, regaining some of his confidence. Sarah is delusional. She imagines things. One last question, Mr. Jenkins, Elena said, stopping right in front of the judge's bench. Did you or did you not have a conversation on the night of October 14th regarding a plan to plant narcotics in Mrs. Jenkins's vehicle to ensure you won the court case? The courtroom went dead silent. Mark blinked. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Excuse me? Did you plan to frame your wife for drug possession? No, Mark shouted, feigning outrage. That is a disgusting accusation. I would never do such a thing. This is harassment, Your Honor. Objection! Arthur Sterling jumped up. Counsel is making baseless accusations without a shred of proof. Elena turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense claims there is no proof. However, we would like to submit into Evidence Exhibit G. Elena pulled the small black USB drive from her pocket. She held it up like a weapon. This drive contains audio recordings taken from the marital home, Elena announced, specifically from a voice-activated smart hub located in the library, a device Mr. Jenkins installed himself. Mark's face turned a color that wasn't quite human, a mix of grey and purple. He gripped the railing of the witness box. That's illegal. Privacy laws. Actually, Elena cut in, Washington law permits the admission of evidence obtained without consent if it proves the commission of a felony. It's called the crime fraud exception. And what is on this drive, Your Honor, is conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and planting evidence. I will allow it, Judge Miller said, his eyes narrowing at Mark. Play the tape. Elena plugged the drive into the court's AV system. The speakers crackled. The courtroom held its breath. Then Mark's voice filled the room. It was clear, arrogant, and undeniable. If the company is worth $200 million, Sarah gets half. We tank the Q3 earnings. We hide the intellectual property under the shell company in the Caymans. Mark closed his eyes on the stand. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The press reporters were typing furiously on their phones. But the tape wasn't done. Jessica's voice. Stop worrying. If she doesn't sign, we plant a few ounces of cocaine in her car, an anonymous tip, and suddenly the grieving wife is a drug addict. Mark's voice. Do it. Call your contact at the precinct. I want her gone, Jess. I want her out of the house by Friday. Elena hit the stop button. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a life being destroyed. But this time, it wasn't Sarah's. Judge Miller slowly turned his chair to face Mark. The look on the judge's face was terrifying. It was pure, unadulterated rage masked by judicial calm. Mr. Jenkins, the judge said, his voice dangerously low. Is that your voice? Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, Sterling, for help, but Sterling was busy packing his briefcase. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. He wasn't going to go down for perjury. I can explain, Mark stammered. Explain? Judge Miller roared, slamming his hand on the bench. You just committed perjury in my courtroom. You conspired to frame an innocent woman, your wife, for a felony. You admitted to securities fraud. The judge turned his gaze to the back of the room. Bailiff, take Mr. Jenkins into custody immediately and secure Miss Vane. No one leaves this room. Jessica Vane jumped up, trying to run toward the door. I didn't do anything. It was his idea. I was just following orders. Sit down, the bailiff shouted, blocking her path and grabbing her arm. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table, watching the chaos unfold. She felt Eleanor's hand on her shoulder. We got them, Elena whispered. Mark was being handcuffed in the witness box. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were pleading now. Sarah, please, tell them it was a joke. Sarah, I'm your husband. Sarah stood up slowly. The pain in her chest was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't the pain of heartbreak anymore. It was the ache of a wound beginning to heal. She looked at the man who had promised to love her forever, the man who had tried to send her to prison. You're not my husband, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the room. You're just a bad investment, and I'm cashing out. As the bailiffs dragged Mark and a screaming Jessica out of the courtroom, Sarah finally let out the breath she had been holding for weeks. She slumped back into her chair, exhausted, as the gallery erupted into applause. But the story wasn't quite over. Justice had been served, but Sarah still had to rebuild the empire they had tried to steal. The sentencing hearing took place 3 months later, on a day that was ironically bright and cheerful. The cherry blossoms were blooming outside the courthouse, a stark contrast to the gloom inside courtroom 4B. The room was packed. The Logitech scandal had become national news. Everyone wanted to see the fall of the golden boy, Mark Jenkins, and the mistress who had helped him dig his own grave. Sarah sat in the front row. She wasn't the fragile woman who had collapsed months ago. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She didn't look at Mark when he was led in, shackles clinking around his ankles. He looked gaunt. The designer suits were gone, replaced by a drab county orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He scanned the crowd, his eyes desperate, until they landed on Sarah. He opened his mouth as if to say something. Perhaps sorry, perhaps help me. But Sarah simply looked through him, as if he were a pane of glass. Jessica was next. The glamour was gone. Her roots were showing, her skin was sallow, and she was trembling violently. She refused to look at Mark. The alliance of convenience had shattered the moment the handcuffs clicked. Judge Miller adjusted his glasses, the silence in the room heavy enough to crush a man. "Mark Jenkins," the judge began, his voice echoing without a microphone. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, and I have seen crimes of greed. But rarely have I seen such a calculated, malicious combination of both. You didn't just want to leave your wife. You wanted to destroy her. You used the legal system, a system designed to protect people, as a weapon to frame an innocent woman." "Your Honor, Mark tried to speak. "Silence!" Judge Miller boomed. "You have forfeited your right to speak. You defrauded your shareholders. You lied to this court. You conspired to plant narcotics. You are not a businessman, Mr. Jenkins. You are a predator." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. "For the charge of securities fraud, I sentence you to 8 years. For perjury and conspiracy, 4 years to be served consecutively. That is 12 years in a federal penitentiary. No possibility of parole for the first 10. Mark's knees gave out. He was held up by 2 bailiffs, sobbing openly. "And Ms. Vane," the judge turned to Jessica, "you claimed you were just following orders. But the audio makes it clear. You were the architect. 7 years. As they dragged Jessica away, she started screaming. "It was him! It was all Mark! Sarah, tell them! Sarah, please!" Sarah didn't flinch. She watched them disappear through the side door, the heavy metal clank of the lock sealing their fate. Elena squeezed her hand. "It's over," Elena whispered. "No," Sarah said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "The trial is over. My work is just beginning." 2 weeks later, the atmosphere at the Logitech headquarters was tense. The stock price had stabilized, but the board of directors was in a panic. They had a company without a leader, and rumors were swirling of a hostile takeover. In the executive boardroom on the 40th floor, Richard Sterling, no relation to the lawyer, the chairman of the board, was pacing nervously. He was a man who disliked change, and he hated surprises even more. "We need to sell," Richard told the 12 other men around the mahogany table. "We rebrand, sell the assets to a competitor, and cash out before the SEC digs any deeper. Mark left us a sinking ship." "But the underlying tech is solid," a younger board member argued. "It doesn't matter," Richard snapped. "Public perception is poison. Who is going to trust Logitech now?" The double doors to the boardroom swung open. The room fell silent. Sarah Jenkins walked in. She had transformed. The soft cardigans and messy buns of her past life were gone. She wore a tailored white suit that looked like armor. Her hair was cut into a sharp, precise bob. She wore heels that clicked rhythmically on the polished floor, a sound that commanded attention. Behind her walked Elena Rossi, carrying a stack of files. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice cool and clear. "Mrs. Jenkins," Richard stammered, stopping his pacing. We weren't expecting you. This is a closed session." "It's a shareholder meeting," Sarah corrected, walking to the head of the table, Mark's old seat. She didn't ask for permission. She pulled the heavy leather chair out and sat down. "And since the court awarded me 51% of Mark's forfeited shares as restitution, I am the session." Richard bristled. "Sarah, look, we understand what you've been through. It's terrible. But this is a complex corporate crisis. You don't have the experience to handle a salvage operation. We're discussing a sale." "There will be no sale," Sarah said. She didn't raise her voice, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You don't understand the logistics," Richard began, using his most patronizing tone. "Don't I?" Sarah interrupted. She signaled to Elena, who slid a tablet across the table to Richard. "I suggest you look at page 4, Richard," Sarah said. "While Mark was the face of this company, giving speeches and chasing skirts, who do you think was optimizing the supply chain algorithms? Who do you think streamlined the Pacific shipping routes in 2023? Richard looked at the tablet. His eyes widened. The notes were detailed, complex, and brilliant. They were signed S. Jenkins. "I wrote the original code for the dispatch system in our garage while Mark was playing video games," Sarah revealed, leaning forward. "I know this company better than any man in this room because I built its heart. Mark just built the facade." She stood up, placing her hands flat on the table. "I've reviewed the minutes from the last 4 quarters, she continued. "Richard, you, alongside Mr. Henderson and Mr. Tate, signed off on the consulting fees that were actually payments to Mark's shell company. You either knew about the fraud, or you were too incompetent to spot it. Now see here," Mr. Henderson blustered, turning red. "No, you see here," Sarah cut him off, her voice like steel. "I am cleaning house. I am not selling this company. I am rebranding it. We are going to be transparent, ethical, and profitable. And we are going to do it without the dead weight." She pointed to the door. "Richard, Henderson, Tate, your resignations, now. Or my next call is to the FBI agents who are still investigating the conspiracy charge. I'm sure they'd love to know who authorized the wire transfers." The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Richard looked at Sarah. He looked for the weak, simple housewife Mark had described. He didn't find her. He found a CEO. He swallowed hard, closed his folder, and stood up. "I'll have my letter on your desk in an hour." "You have 10 minutes, Sarah said. As the 3 men filed out of the room, ashamed and defeated, the remaining board members looked at Sarah with a mix of fear and awe. "Anyone else?" Sarah asked, scanning the room. No one moved. "Good," Sarah sat back down. "Let's get to work. Elena is the new interim CFO. First order of business, we're donating 10% of this quarter's profits to legal aid for victims of domestic financial abuse. Make the press release." That evening, Sarah returned to the house in Silver Lake. It was quiet. The oppressive silence that used to suffocate her was gone, replaced by a peaceful stillness. She had hired a crew to remove everything Jessica had touched. The gaudy red curtains were gone. The heavy perfumes were scrubbed away. The house smelled of lemon oil and fresh rain. Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and walked out onto the patio. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old photograph. It was a picture of her and Mark from 10 years ago, eating pizza on the floor of their first apartment. They looked so happy, so young. For a moment, a wave of grief washed over her. She mourned the boy he used to be before the money and the ego consumed him. But she didn't mourn the man he became. She took a lighter from the patio table. With a steady hand, she lit the corner of the photograph. She watched the flame cool the edges, turning the memory into ash. She dropped it into the metal fire pit and watched it burn until there was nothing left but dust. "Goodbye, Mark," she whispered. She turned around and looked at her reflection in the glass door. The woman staring back was older, yes. She had scars. Her heart had been broken, stunned, and stopped. But it was beating now, stronger than ever. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a conqueror. Sarah took a sip of wine, smiled, and walked back inside to run her empire. And that is how Sarah Jenkins rose from the ashes. Mark and Jessica thought they could bury her, but they forgot that she was a seed. They gave her 12 years of prison time to think about what they did, while Sarah took back everything they tried to steal and made it better. Sarah proved that the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting dirty. The best revenge is success. It's fixing your crown, walking into the room they kicked you out of, and running the show. Mark lost his freedom, but Sarah found herself. Wow, what a journey. I have to ask, do you think Sarah was too merciful, letting the other board members stay? Or was she right to just fire the leaders? I want to hear your business strategy in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of absolute justice, please smash that like button. It helps us create more long stories like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. We have a crazy story coming up next week about a lottery winner whose family tried to have him committed. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and never let anyone tell you you're weak.